Hello, it's Leslie, and welcome to the interview with Leslie Heaney. I'm very excited to be sharing today's episode with all of you. It's part 2 of my conversation with American mezzo-soprano and world-famous opera superstar, Denyce Graves. In this episode, Denyce and I talk about her creation of the Denyce Graves Foundation. It's a foundation focused on developing and mentoring the great classical vocal artists of tomorrow, while honoring the mostly unknown history of the many classical vocal artists that have come before. Denyce and I talk about her commitment to her students and fostering the next generation of opera talents. We talk about the incredible work she and the foundation are doing right now to achieve this. And we also talk about this incredible residency that Denyce is doing with some of her students up here at Wethersfield, right next door to me here in Amenia, New York. And after their 1-week residency working at this spectacular estate, which is now being preserved by a foundation, the students will host a recital at Wethersfield this Saturday. I'm especially excited to be having Denyce and the students here at my house for a little barbecue tonight. And I'm hoping I can rope Denyce into a little bit of karaoke. So keep you posted on that, and I hope you enjoy part 2 of this conversation as much as I did having it. And now, here's more of Denyce Graves. So, it's 2021. COVID is in full swing.
Yes.
And that's the year that you decided to start the Denyce Graves Foundation. What was the impetus for that?
My students. My students created it. It was my love for my students, my concern for my students, and what they were going to do.
These are students at Juilliard, or where were you teaching?
Students at Juilliard and students at Peabody Conservatory.
Okay.
Because what happened, the singers were considered to be the super spreaders, right? We were the first ones that, the first thing that happened was the theater shut down, because when you're singing, right? Like, we didn't know, and we didn't understand also COVID. You know, we were all trying to figure it out. And what is this thing in our midst that's here to stay, right? And what does it mean for those of us who make our living using our breath?
I didn't even think about that. I mean, you think about theater shutting down and Broadway shuts down, but the idea of your actual craft being something that, projecting all the things that you need to do.
We were the first ones to go. Let's get rid of this sect. Let's get rid of this lot, And so I just thought, what am I going to do? What are my kids going to do? Like, some of them have just graduated and some of them have just begun to embark on a career, and all of a sudden, and they've got to pay back their student loans, and what's going to happen to all my kids, and so I was reaching out to my kids, trying to figure out, like, okay, what's the plan? And by the way, I will say that the whole time that I've been teaching, I've been saying to them, we're going to have parallel passions too. We love being storytellers, we love making music, and we're going to look and explore at other things that we also love, right? And so it was really, really, really scary. And I had this one student who was really angry with me, and she did not hold back her tongue. And she said, you sat at the piano all those years and you encouraged me to pursue this career path. And now look at where we are. And you don't have any answers. There's nothing you can do or say.
Did you say it's a global pandemic? And I'm just...
No, she was just like
just
you've had your career.
Her frustration.
You've had your career. You've done it. Now what's going to happen for us?
Right,
who are out there. And that pressed on my heart. But it was a gift, just like so many things are, if we can see them that way, right? It hurt. I cried. It hurt me. But it pressed on me because it needed to press on me, because I needed that to help me create the foundation. Because I just kept thinking, what am I going to do? I've got to do something to help my kids. I can't just be here and teach them vocal technique and send them out to a world without arming them and preparing them for a real pathway forward. That was the first thing. And I started doing many, many different things. So I love to cook. And that also came from my mom. My sister loves to cook too. But one of the things I started to say earlier, in addition to my mom assigning us, each night of the week of something, whether it was book report night or sewing night or music night or whatever it was, when my mother came home, we had to have dinner for her ready. So everybody had a week of cleaning. You had a week to clean, or you had a week to do the dishes, or you had a week to cook. I think my brother and my sister were actually probably better cooks than they wanted to be. I think they were trying to be slick and say, and and they would go out to play and they wouldn't prepare things that, and my mother always liked what I prepared. And so one of the things that I would do with my students is that if they were getting prepared for a recital or an audition tour or special performance, I would have them come out to the house in Baltimore and run their program. And I would have some friends come over to just give them a small audience. And then I cook a dinner.
With no tomatoes, no dairy.
That's right. That's right. No dairy, none of the stuff that can wreak havoc. And I would prepare this dinner, and the kids love doing that. Oh, Miss D, when are we going to come to your house again? They still ask me. And there are still kids who have graduated and gone on into their lives. I was speaking with one today saying, can you make me a lasagna? That this morning we're having that. And my husband would come home and say, honey, seriously, like, didn't they graduate like 6 years ago? Like, why are they still here in the house,
That is.
And so I started this online cooking show called Cooking with Denyce. You can look at it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You can look at them. And what I would do was, with a lot of my students and industry people, go into their kitchens, because we all have to eat, right?
Right, yeah.
Right? And talk about what they were doing, or ways to reach a new audiences, or how were they finding ways to create while cooking, talking to them, okay? So that was an online thing that happened. Now, it's important to tell you about the creation of the foundation, because it was sort of a two-pronged thing. One was this student of mine, Tammy, who was really angry with me. And I was thinking, I've got to do something. And so I wanted to try to start creating community. And I started doing, those like mosaics where, I would have them, like, let's all sing a song in, 6-part harmony, right? And you record it on your device and put it together. And we did a fair amount of those to just lift morale and sort of build community with my students who were just exasperated with not knowing what the next move was going to be. Simultaneously, I had a student who was from Pittsburgh who was singing outside of what was formerly known as the National Negro Opera Company, talking about this great American hero, Mary Cardwell Dawson.
Yes.
Right, okay. So I was saying, Chantal, what are you doing? And who is this woman? And what are you talking about? So while I was doing the cooking show, I would be talking about this woman. Have you guys heard about this woman? Like, I'm stirring the, like the soup.
Oh, with some of your industry friends that you were cooking to see if they knew of her legacy.
Did you hear about this woman named Mary Cardwell Dawson? This woman who is considered the first lady of opera, this black woman who created this opera company for all black singers at a time when black artists did not have a stage or did not, right? Okay. So, and she had chapters in Detroit and in Chicago and in Washington, D.C., New York, New Jersey, Baltimore, Pittsburgh. She brought them to Carnegie Hall. She brought them to the Metropolitan Opera at a time when black artists were not, were prohibited from being in those spaces. Who was this woman that we didn't learn about? I didn't learn about her at Oberlin. I didn't learn about her at New England Conservatory. Who was this woman who was this incredible impresario who created this stage? And, so they weren't allowed to perform. She created this all-black opera company. She went to New England Conservatory herself. She wanted to be a singer.
And this was the 1920s?
25. Yeah. This was, and actually before that, because anyway, her time there was fraught with all kinds of difficulty because they kept changing the goalposts and making it impossible she was the only black person there. So they made it impossible for her, but she stuck to it. She was almost 30 by the time she graduated in 1925 because they kept changing the requirements and all this stuff, expecting that she was, But anyway, she persisted, and yet she persisted, right? She wanted to come out and graduate with her certificate and make a name for herself. It was not going to happen for her as a soprano, as a black woman in 1925 to sing as a lead character on the world's opera stages. So her response to that was, well, okay, I'll create my own opera company. So she created her own opera company. And what did she do? She hired, amazing. So she hired 1,800 singers, and she hired the orchestra and the directors and the designers and all. And she had this house in Pittsburgh. The top floor was where they would rehearse, and then the second floor was where she taught over some 600 kids, right? Music, and she taught voice, and she taught stage direction, and she taught languages, she taught everything. Her husband had a electrical business as well. And she worked with people like Robert McFerrin, who's the dad of Bobby McFerrin, and
Oh, wow.
Ahmad Jamal, and Camilla Williams, and Lillian Avanti. And so while she did not have the career that she sought after, or that she trained for, and that she wanted to have, her calling was much more important, right? She was lifting up and promoting the next generation of artists. And she created an opportunity for Black classically trained artists to perform. So one of the things that she lived in Washington, D.C., one of the great challenges amongst so many is that they weren't allowed to perform inside. And so she had to perform outside. And she had this barge that they would perform on, this floating barge in the Potomac, right, in Washington, which is where the Kennedy Center sits.
Oh, stop it.
Right? I know. It's just so fabulous. So I was talking about this woman, like, have you guys heard about this? I'm doing the cooking show. We had over 250,000 people watching the cooking show. Yes. Because people would hear about it, and it was fun. It was fun. You got to watch your.
Oh,
as
soon as I leave here, I'm
right.
Because actually, I want to get some of these recipes that don't have dairy
Yeah.
and all these other acidic things.
And we had so much fun talking about. But people.
And did anyone know? Did anyone know?
So people would. So we were doing this live on StreamYard, and people would say, "Who is this? And who are you talking about? Or who is?" And so people were writing to me and said, what is this you're talking about? And who is this lady? And so I had all my students. So then I found out about this house, as I was telling you, it was this one student who was singing, Chantal Brazil, singing. And then I had my students, I said, listen, we're going to do a project. Everybody's going to sing an aria and upload it with the hashtag Save the National Opera House, right? It was formerly known as the National Negro Opera House.
In Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I said, we're going to raise money to restore that opera house. That's what we're going to do as a studio, right? So I'm talking about this while we're doing the cooking show. If you guys know about this, and you know this woman did this, and she was amazing, and she did that, and she's considered to be the first lady of opera, and so people were writing all the time, who is this you're talking about, and who is this lady? And the foundation was being created. I didn't know that.
It just sort of all kind of snowballed from that.
It gave birth to itself.
Yeah.
You know, I was speaking with my students, I was speaking with industry people, and we were talking while we were in our kitchens, right? And then people started to get in touch with me and say, how can I contribute? Or I want to donate to this, or there's something that I want to do. It's not my project. I didn't know anything about it.
But meanwhile, you were sort of doing, by having your students down to your farm, having them perform in those small environments, right? Because it was COVID and cooking. I mean, you sort of had your own kind of salon in a way that she did, right? In her house in Pittsburgh. The same thing struck me. I thought, how do we not know about Mary Caldwell Dawson? And you brought her story to the Smithsonian, right? You brought, yes.
That's right. So the foundation sits at the intersection of social justice, American history, and the classical vocal arts. And it's about lifting into rightful prominence those great Americans who have contributed to our cultural fabric but have been left out of the telling of the American story. And there are different ways that we address the social justice, the American history piece, and the classical vocal arts. And so the foundation the Denyce Graves Foundation has three big programs: Shared Voices, which we're going to talk about because that's what we were so incredibly fortunate to have partnered and connected with Wethersfield about.
Yep.
Hidden Voices, which is about creating works of art that tell those stories, whether that's through documentaries, through children's books, through calendars, through note cards.
Telling those unknown stories of these,
unknown stories of these great heroes. And Generational Voices, which is another older, Shared Voices is for the collegiate level, and Generational Voices are for the emerging artists, right? And standing in that gap of exactly the question that you asked.
What happens when you
And that's the same question that the parents are asking, and the students themselves are having. Okay, now what?
Because having that structure and support of being at a conservatory for college or being in one of those programs, you know what the path is, right, until you graduate. But having that kind of support from your foundation and from you is really critical, right, to nurturing those young artists.
And it is critical because we stand in that gap and we are that bridge from the time that you finish your formal training before you embark on a professional career, if you're fortunate, to be a structure and an anchor there to help shepherd through that period before you emerge.
I didn't realize Shared Voices was primarily for the college students.
College kids.
So you are embarking on this residency at Wethersfield, which is this estate and garden location up in Amenia, New York, that is fostering different. It's basically becoming a space for creative arts, and you are occupying that space and bringing your students to that space for this residency. And these will be the college students?
Those are college students.
Yeah.
I think that we are all of us, all over the globe, are bombarded 24/7 with the one horror after the next. And we're all so scared and we're all so wounded and we just don't know what we're leaving our children to. And everybody's hurt and everybody has legitimate, perspective. And then there are the stories that you need to hear that will help heal us, right? It was Bernadette who got in touch with us at the foundation.
And this is our mutual friend, Bernadette Murray. Yeah.
These are the people that should be on the news.
Yeah.
This is what we need to hear about. We need to hear that. We desperately need to hear the stories of bravery, of courage, of kindness, of generosity. And there's plenty of it, but we just don't hear it, right? So there's this woman who's this little angel called Bernadette Murray, who gets in touch with me and said, I have a spectacular space and I see you, right? This is going to make me cry. I see you and I see what you're doing with these young people and I want to help and I want to offer something. That's what we should know about the goodness that's in the world, about the kindness that's in the world. And it is there, but we just don't hear it. We don't, and that's what's important. That's what's necessary and vital for our survival, right? Is the goodness and kindness of the humanity of people and that which connects us. But everything divides us. And anyway.
I mean, what I love about that story, you and I were talking about Wethersfield itself, and you said, gosh, how did that get started? And it was a similar, people coming together to save, the family that left the house, and then to figure out how can we use this incredible space. And part of their mission is fostering the arts in that space. And for them, I know it's just such an incredible honor to have you coming up, be involved with this residency, and then at the end having a recital that people can go and hear these incredible young people after you've spent a week, working with them in this really inspiring space.
Yeah. So that's Shared Voices. So Shared Voices is an HBCU, the Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and our Conservatory Exchange. So if you look at some great, great, great artists, right? If you look at Jesse Norman, if you look at Robert McFerrin, if you look at Matilda Dobbs, if you look at Leontine Price, if you look at Kevin Short, if you look at Leah Hawkins, if you look at Solomon Howard, the list could go on and on and on and on. These are all people who started out at HBCUs. There has been a long-standing tradition of a connection between HBCUs and conservatories. So we didn't invent that. That's something that's always existed. But what we are doing is going out of the mainstream to find great, talented young people who are serious, who've got the goods, and who want to make a career path, but who may not have the infrastructure and the resources available to them to do that. So we take the training in the conservatories. We take what's good from each one of those learning institutions, and they are very, very different. We send the conservatory students to the HBCUs, the HBCU students to the conservatories. It's an exchange program for the students, for faculty, and for administration, who are committed to learning and sharing from each other, and with the mission of creating a more diverse and inclusive classical vocal arts landscape. And we get that at the collegiate level, right? And we get everybody working together with this mission.
Does your foundation get involved in identifying those students?
Yep.
Or okay.
In fact, yesterday what I was doing was going through a lot of material and listening to a lot of recordings from new HBCUs. So we have a consortium of schools, and we've got Fisk and Morehouse and Howard and Morgan and Juilliard and Peabody and Oberlin and Manhattan School currently in the consortium. But this coming season, we're going to have much more HBCUs also involved. And what is happening for us at Wethersfield that we are so profoundly fortunate to have happen for us and for our young people is a week-long training in this glorious, gobsmackingly beautiful atmosphere, where they don't have to worry about the coursework and all of the things that pull you away from, where you can just sort of concentrate, focus in on the art itself and the refinement of that, right? With some of the industry's great artists. We've got Pierre Vallet, who's heading that up, who is a conductor at the Metropolitan Opera, is a coach at the Metropolitan Opera. We've got Gina Lipinski, who's a wonderful acting coach. We've got Deborah Birnbaum, who's a fantastic voice teacher. And we've got a team assembled that will work where the kids go to language coachings, go to body movement, go to acting coachings, going to voice lessons, musical coachings. Because when you talk about coach, the difference between classical music and, let's say, pop music is that a voice teacher is very different from a vocal coach. Very different. A voice teacher works on the building of the voice itself, the voice, nothing but the technical aspect of how to sing and how to support your voice. The vocal coach works on music.
So once you have your piece, sort of helping you through that piece and identifying what you should be doing within that piece, that's the vocal coaches?
Yeah, so for example, you are assigned a piece. You take that piece to your voice teacher to work the technical aspects of how do I hit that high note? How do I do the middle part? How do I sing that low note? That's what they work on, the mechanics of singing. You take it to a coach for the music. What are the notes? What are the rhythm? What does this mean? How do I interpret that, right? And the two should not encroach on the other. So sometimes in voice lessons, you talk about interpretation, but you go to a vocal coach to make sure that the notes are right, that the rhythms are right, that the language is right, that the pronunciation of the language is right.
Right. Oh gosh, I didn't even think about all of that.
Huge piece. And then you've got, because you've got Italian, we give the main three for us in opera, English too, but English is hard to sing in, by the way, but Italian and French and German, and you've got Spanish, and you've got Russian, and you've got Czech, and you've got Hungarian, and you've got all of the other different languages for which you need a specific coach on just that language to make sure that that's authentic and that that's right, and the vowels are correct, right? Because anyway, it's a whole other conversation, but another language means another placement inside of the whole mechanism of the voice, right? Like if you say those are not sounds that we have in English. So they're going to place differently. You're going to have to sing that differently than you would sing an American
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so all of those things, it's super layered, right? And so anyway, Pierre Vallet, who's a wonderful, beautiful conductor at the Metropolitan Opera, has assembled a team that will go to Wethersfield. Everybody will stay there for the week and will work around the clock, during the day on all sorts of different coachings, and then selecting the right repertoire and preparing for the concert on the 13th, on that Saturday. And for us, it's an amazing gift, but a terrific opportunity to get particularly some of the HBCU students to get a jump on the coming year, also getting used to the rigor of what is going to be required for them through the Denyce Graves Foundation and what we have programmed for them during the year. and a great opportunity to just work on the refining of the voice. Because during the school year, right, you're divided because there's so much
particularly those kids who were not at conservatories, right, who are at the
That's
historically
right. The
black colleges.
HBCUs have a very different track from the kids who are at the conservatories, where it's much more streamlined and focused on that particular craft. That's not the case for the kids at the HBCUs, right?
Well, you were talking too about your voice teacher and how she supported you and reached into her own pocket. So I would assume that the foundation is doing some of that for these students to help support them and
Absolutely.
in that piece.
I mean, that is critical because this is an expensive program. To be able to do this program, to get the coaches to the HBCUs to work with them, to get the students to us we've partnered with the Metropolitan Opera. We've partnered with the Smithsonian Museums to do a lot of our programming. So through the Shared Voices program, and it's going to be the Shared Voices student, the collegiate students that are going to be at Wethersfield, we do ourselves through the foundation a certain amount of programming throughout the year that we call in all the students that we prepare for.
How wonderful.
Several times
and could
during
bring
the
in
season.
maybe some of those opera houses that you talked about that have these kind of residents right for the next step, for them taking a look at that.
Well, so that's very interesting. So a lot of times, since we, and this goes back to what I was talking about, the philanthropic part, like Wethersfield coming to us, there are a lot of organizations that have also come to the foundation and say, we want to be able to showcase some of your young up and coming students. We're doing an event in which we would like to have music there. Could you recommend or could you put together a program? We're getting a lot of that happen.
That's terrific.
Spectacular. And the kids get a chance to make a little bit of money, and they have to present themselves as real professionals out there, whether it's for a wedding or, some big ceremony. Oh, we've got 2 events coming up now at the end of this month with the Baltimore Symphony. They called us and they said, we would like to use some of your young people.
Great.
That's huge. I would have loved to have had the opportunity for something like that as a young person. We had Castleton Music Festival get in touch with us and say, we're doing for Judge David Tattle has a new book out called Visions, and we're doing a big event around that, and we would like to have music. Can we engage, some of the singers and, to come and do an evening, and that, or somebody's having a big dinner party, or it happens all the time. And it's great experience for the young people. It's
so
fantastic.
Great. Such great exposure and such great experience.
Exactly.
And so Hidden Voices, bringing some of these kind of unknown,
unknown,
legends,
or little known.
right? Little known, sort of to the forefront.
Right. That's a different program entirely. So we have 3 programs. They all have the word voices in them, right? Right. So Shared Voices is the exchange program. Hidden Voices is a different program entirely, that it's about creating works of art that tells the story of those hidden figures. Now, sometimes what we do is we will have the Shared Voices, because we have this relationship with the Smithsonian. So one of the projects that we do at the end of the school year of our Shared Voices year, which goes along the school year calendar, is that we will have those students do a project on some hidden voices. So we did that this year at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, in the Oprah Winfrey Theater, where we had each of the students from our 17 cohort members do a presentation on a hidden figure, where they spoke about them and then they sang about them.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
It was fantastic. So in that case, those were the 2 programs working together, where the Shared Voices students helped the Hidden Voices program by exposing the public to those little known artists
stories.
and those stories, right? So and sometimes they work together as puzzle pieces, right? The program in which each of the programs, work together.
In the many decades that you've been singing, how have you seen the face of opera change?
And it has.
Yeah.
And it has changed tremendously. It's so exciting now. When I made my Met debut, that was quite something. My mother organizing this bus trip for, everybody to come up. But that was probably one of the nights that the Metropolitan Opera had, not seen so many Black people, right, in the opera house. And they were there. They were there. Let me tell you, like after I finished singing, you could hear somebody go, "Go Denyce!"
That's
right?
amazing.
It was incredible. Now you can go to the theater and you see what a reflection of America,
Yeah.
what the world looks like, right? And to the Metropolitan Opera's credit, I will say this too, that Peter Gelb came out and made an announcement some seasons ago that the Metropolitan Opera is absolutely committed. And Peter, during the pandemic, was kind enough to have a couple Zooms with me when we were putting together the foundation. And I was telling him our idea. And the Metropolitan Opera has become a partner. The Metropolitan Opera sends some of its coaches to our HBCUs, to our conservatories to work with the kids, Metropolitan Opera people,
It's incredible.
to work with the kids in our Shared Voices program. And during the month of February, when there's a period that the Met goes dark where they sort of recalibrate and take a little bit of a breather, our kids go there to the Met to go to rehearsals, to coach, to sit in on performances, to do master classes. For so many of the kids, it was their first chance to go to New York City, but certainly to the Metropolitan Opera, right? To see, they can actually see, right, this trajectory of where it is that they want to go, what they're reaching toward, right, what they're reaching for. So we're fortunate in that way. But what I was going to say earlier is that Peter Gelb said, we know that La Boheme isn't going to go anywhere. Traviata isn't going anywhere. We all love those great standards and that make the profession what it is, right? Those standard hallmark pieces. But that they also want to incorporate the telling of new stories that are relevant to people today, right? That make a difference in their lives now. And we all have known even when I was getting started, that when we looked around the theater and we saw the blue-haired old ladies, we'd say, uh-oh, what's going to happen?
Right. What's next? Yes.
What's next?
How do we expose this younger generation to this incredible art form?
How do we get new people into the theater, right? And so there's been a real concerted effort on the part of the Metropolitan Opera, but I would say all around the world, this has been something that we've all been concerned with how do we excite and expose people to this gorgeous art form to bring them into the house, right? So Peter said, Denyce, this is what we're going to do. So when the Metropolitan Opera, after they had shut down during the pandemic, and they opened with Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones, they were saying that this was the first time that the Metropolitan Opera would have an opera by a Black composer, but it wasn't true.
Oh, you hit them with a hidden voice. Did you
We
have
hit them with a hidden voice. You see? We hit them with a hidden.
Gosh.
Mary Cardwell Dawson brought her all-Black opera company to the Metropolitan Opera back in the 50s. The union would not allow them to perform standard repertoire, so they performed a piece by an African-American composer, Clarence Cameron Waite, called Uwanga, and he was the first African-American. But anyway, be that as it may, the Metropolitan Opera took a very decisive stance that we want to incorporate more stories that are relevant to people today. And one of the things that we saw, I was talking about, my mom bringing this busload of people to the Metropolitan Opera, is that when the Met reopened after the pandemic with Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones, and I should say this, that when Mary Cardwell Dawson brought her all-Black opera company, that it was the first time that the Metropolitan Opera had allowed an independent opera company to rent the space. So they rented the space.
Right. It was, they didn't have the Metropolitan sort of behind it officially. Yeah.
Exactly. This was official with Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones. That evening was such a celebration. You just had to see everybody that was in the theater that night. It was truly astounding. And that was something that we all remarked on. People who gave speeches at the dinner party afterward talked about the just array of all kinds of people that were there. And that's the focus and that's the goal. We want, music belongs to everybody. It is a universal language. People come to, and I think people have been scared of the opera. People think, oh, it's in another language and I don't know what everybody's singing about, or, and I don't understand it. And throughout the whole of my career, I've had people come every single time saying, this is my first opera. I had no idea that this is what it was like.
Yeah.
And I really love this. you know? So it's a question of education. It's a question of exposure, right? It's a question of accessibility.
Well, I mean, you were just saying that you were mentioning Peter Gelb, which I have an amazing, funny story about him, which I'll tell you about later. But we lived on the same block a long time ago. And anyway, he's a delightful person. But he's reaching out to you because you're the person who's doing that work, right? So the Met is interested in what you're doing and want to have bring what you're doing into what they're doing. But it's because of what you're doing that it's even sort of at the forefront there.
And they're interested in pipeline, right? They want to find the next Leontine Price. They want to find the next Jesse Norman, right? They want to find the next Matilda Dobbs. And in often cases, they could be at the HBCUs.
Well, and they have the unicorn there sourcing the talent from them. So what is next for the foundation and what is next for you?
So what's next for the foundation is really the build out of generational voices, much more. Shared Voices has sort of become the flagship of the foundation. But there are lots of other things we're doing. There are lots of different tentacles at the foundation. We are really about lifting up and educating and getting into the K through 12 space too. Some of these great American figures who have shaped this country that we don't know anything about. You know, you talk about Mozart, right? Like everybody knows who Mozart is. You talk about Chevalier Saint-Georges. People don't know who he is. He was a Black composer, lived 80 years before Mozart. They say, and they wrote in the style of Mozart, but he wrote it first. Yeah. Even though Mozart was genius, and he was, there's no question about that. So was Chevalier Saint-Georges, who Mozart is known to have, let's say, borrowed some of his work. And so I believe, and I see a straight line where social justice is concerned. Yeah. For this matter, I think it's actually really important because we've been told a lopsided history.
Or incomplete.
Incomplete.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. I'm going to tell you something. My time in Germany, it wasn't until I was in Europe, living with a German family, meeting people, all sorts of people, me, this little girl who grew up in an all-Black neighborhood where there was no exposure to other kinds of people outside of people who looked like me, right? It's not until you have that experience that you recognize and realize that we're more alike than unalike. Otherwise, we've got this dynamic of the them and us. And that's the thing that keeps us divided.
Well, you're just talking about what you had heard about Asian students and then versus
it wasn't until I started meeting them, they started coming into my studio and working with them. And that was not the case at all. But had I not had the experience, all I would have known was the other argument that I'd heard. It's not until you have the experience yourself, until you reach across the aisle and you say, hi, how are you? And you start learning and you start finding out and you see that we're all, it's our humanity that unites us. We all want the same things. We all want to have a beautiful life. It's beautiful. We all want the best for our children, for our family. We want to be able to take care of them. We want to have beautiful memories, beautiful experience. We all want that. But in our minds, we've got to compartmentalize, and these people over here, and these people are dangerous, and these people are the enemy, and all these different things that creates this amazing division. And that's when two guys can get on the back of a pickup truck and say, that guy is over there jogging. He doesn't belong there. And they shoot him dead and feel that that's right.
Yeah.
That's how that kind of thing gets into our fiber, gets into our core, because we are not told a complete truth about who each of us are. I got to tell you, I grew up in a Black community, and I had been taught that white people were the enemy. And it wasn't until I got out there myself well, first of all, I'm married to a white man, right? Yeah. And there are people who are good people, beautiful people who believe what they believe because they've not had any other experience that can show them otherwise. That work is important. We do that work through art. We do it through art.
And I think telling the stories of understanding how we all are interconnected and how we all do influence. You just talked about Mozart and how he had drawn, or sounds like maybe he didn't draw from it in the most ethical way. I don't know. But just having that shared experience. I mean, just talking about Mary Caldwell Dawson, when I was reading about her, I thought, gosh, how do we not know her story? Her story as a Black American, but her story also as a woman, and her
100%.
You talked about her persistence and the resilience, and just knowing that story for young women, young Black women and young women generally, is a really important story to be told and a real inspiration among all the other hidden voices that you're featuring. But it is really, really important work.
Who was one of her great champions? Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Eleanor Roosevelt. Same angel, too, for Marian Anderson.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the things that we don't, those stories are important to know, about Einstein's relationship with Marian Anderson, right? Like what went on there, what happened there, all this amazing material that we don't know. But when it comes to the social justice piece, you see, the Black people were considered to be, like they were, and relegated over here. And so it wasn't part of the mainstream. That's why we don't know it. It was covered sometimes in the Black dailies. If you look there were over 200 Black dailies back in the day where you could find out about Mary Caldwell Dawson, right?
Where are your students going to find these hidden voices when they're doing their research?
Well, we have a wonderful historian on our team who, by the way, is a white woman.
Yeah.
And has spent her entire life, because she herself has been drawn her whole life to those stories. That was her own personal mission. We were just fortunate to find her, because when we started looking at who knew this information, who were the historians, it happened to be this white woman in Arkansas who happens to know more about Mary Caldwell Dawson than anybody. It's crazy, right? And this is what I'm saying, that we have to see and to tell those stories. It's what has made the rich tapestry that is America has been all of us.
Well, when I asked the question, what is next for Denyce Graves, I hoped one of the answers would be running for president or governor or something, because we could all use your message right now. And what an absolute treasure. Talk about creating the fabric of America. You are to that fabric. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm very fortunate because I've had the example of magnificent people like Bernadette, who just pops in like an angel and say, I want to help. I have had so many examples throughout the whole of my life.
But a lot of other people have had guardian angels and people who've helped them, and they haven't paid it forward the way you are.
Thank you.
It's a really wonderful thing that you're doing. I'm so, so grateful to you for taking the time to come talk to me today, because I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of speaking with you. I can't wait to see the residency and the recital. It's right in my backyard, and I just know how honored the community is to have the residency coming and have you coming to Wethersfield. It's a true honor, and it's going to be a spectacular, spectacular week and event. So,
thank you. And thank you for doing this.
Oh.
This is your part. You're getting that story out there so that people can hear about it, right?
Denyce,
so everybody plays their part.
Yeah, but on the hidden voices front, it'd be so interesting to see how that curriculum can get more integrated into I love that you're working on the K through 12 piece too.
That is what we are working on.
What an honor to meet you, and what an incredible contribution you're making, to our country. And
well, all glory to God. So thank you.
That brings us to the end of this episode of The Interview. A huge thank you again to Denyce Graves for joining us. And as always, thank you again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Instagram at The Interview with Leslie. A new podcast is released every Wednesday. So until next week, this is Leslie Heaney, and don't forget to join The Interview.